Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
This week, thousands protest at their schools and in the streets across the state and at the Capitol. Students from around the country join in the Day of Action to defend public education. Jerry Brown officially steps into the governor's race with an online announcement.
I'm prepared to focus on nothing else but fixing this state I love.
Outrage over muni cuts and fare increases and Mayor Newsom's plan to reduce hours and salaries for San Francisco city workers. Also, a conversation with White House senior advisor Valerie Jarrett. Coming up next. Hello, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel, Rachel Gordon, staff writer with the San Francisco Chronicle on cuts to muni and city workers. Carla Marinucci, political reporter, also with the Chronicle, on Jerry Brown's announcement and other political news. Lisa Krieger, higher education reporter for the San Jose Mercury News on the Day of Action to Save Public Education. Lisa, yesterday's outpouring was a demonstration of just how frustrated people are over funding for education. Mm-hmm. What was the impact?
Got people's attention. If you were sitting on a freeway at 880 or 80 or down at Santa Cruz, a lot of anger, and I think their message did get through. What's happening is that the kids are paying more for less, and they're very frustrated. It's like you're living in an apartment, $1,000 a month rent, all of a sudden your rent's raised to $1,300, but your gas and water gets turned off. I mean, that's the perception the kids have, and they're having trouble getting classes, having trouble getting what they need to graduate. All that being said, though, there isn't any money, and the budget used to have a general fund that could dedicate more to higher education. It has other commitments now, other priorities. So what needs to happen, or what has happened, is that tuition's increased. Aid has increased as well. We're moving to a high tuition, high aid state. That wasn't the case. A lot of people had expectations education would be free, and that's not happening anymore.
Lisa, talk about how much the tuition has gone up, and then California is still a bargain, though. So
it's an absolute bargain. However, it's gone up 30% in 1 year. And that's very hard for households to plan. I mean, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, there was a plan for how fees would increase, and it was very methodical, it was very predictable, no more than 10% a year, and you could plan a budget around that. When the money wasn't there, they desperately needed to raise revenues, and they did it 30%. Community colleges less so, but you're right. All that being said, if you still compare us to Pennsylvania, to Michigan, to Vermont, Florida, it's still a very good education.
That's very little comfort to say that it's a bargain and it's 30%.
Right.
How can families survive this?
Tuition for families making less than $70,000, those families do get support. It's complicated. The financial aid network is complex, not well coordinated, but there's federal aid, there's institutional aid, other places to go. The middle class is what will be squeezed. I mean, we do, I'm in Palo Alto, and there are kids who go to a strong high school or private high schools so they can get into the University of California at Berkeley and have a cheap education for 4 years. So that's, there are a lot of thoughts about how do we reform this in the long haul, and a lot of ways to make the schools more efficient and to charge fees that represent more of what we're offering.
So Lisa, we're seeing that tuition's going up, but we're also seeing that cuts are being made, that there aren't a number of classes and things. So people are paying for what? And what is being cut? What's the effect at the college level when there's not the money that they say they need to run their institution?
Exactly. Well, what happens is that if you need biology, chemistry, whatever, to progress for your major, you'll move much slowly through the system. And the big fear is that our graduation rates will fall, and the time to degree, it's called, will be longer. And that's hard on the state as well, and it's more expensive. So some of the reforms that are being mentioned are ways to improve transfer rates, eliminating some of the redundancies at campuses. A lot of interesting proposals about maybe the flagship campuses should charge more than UC Merced. They're short-term budget problems, but they're also long-term problems, structural problems that, you hate to waste a crisis, and we're coming up 50 years into the master plan, and it offers an opportunity to totally rethink how we handle higher education in this state.
Let me ask you about the protests that went on. So people were angry, as you said, they got attention, especially when they went on the freeways, but so what? Who was listening to them, and is anyone going to do anything about it?
The governor said yesterday, I'm happy to see you here. I hope this puts pressure on the legislature, and he would like to see greater funding. In his January budget, he proposed greater funding. I talked to Assemblyman Cotto from San Jose yesterday, and there's some tax loopholes he says he'll close. And maybe, oil taxes, taxes on entertainment. People are looking all over.
We live in a state, though, where taxes are not
Exactly,
allowed, right?
exactly.
But what about California's inability to make it into the first round of the what is it?
Race
Race
the
to the
race
top.
to the top.
Race to the
Right,
top.
Yeah.
Big disappointment, and we're not sure why. The expectation is that, or the assumption is that teachers needed to sign on to reforms that were required if you wanted this aid, and we did not get the 1/2
Don't we have
needed
another
to
bite of
sign
that
on.
apple?
What is Race to the Top? Is that federal funding?
Federal funding from Obama to real substantial reforms in our school that comes with giant grant money. There will be a second chance this summer for an additional appeal. We'll keep our fingers crossed. We certainly need it.
Well, I'm going to talk to Carla about somebody that think they might have some answers to our problem. Yesterday, Jerry Brown made his announcement. And did he have solutions to any of the multitude of problems that the station admission is facing?
Jerry Brown did, as you noted, had that video announcement and said that his solutions are that he has an insider's knowledge but an outsider's mind when it comes to handling the problems of the state. That is, he's been here for 40 years in public service. He's embracing this idea of public service. And the fact that he has been Secretary of State, Oakland mayor, etc. This is a year when not a lot of politicians want to do that. So when he's talking about solutions to the problems, he's saying he's going to bring together all 120 legislators up there in Sacramento personally, that politics is about personality. And he argues you can't have somebody from outside the system who doesn't know these personalities to come in and really knock heads together and get these budget issues fixed. I think what we heard from Jerry Brown this week, we got to interview him for about an hour, was he said, I'm not going to lie to you about how hard or easy this is going to be. He said it might take a year or two before this budget is balanced. And
he's saying no new taxes. So what is his proposal?
He's saying
Will there be more
no new
cuts,
taxes
or?
unless the voters approve
Right.
them. So he's leaving that door open. He took a lot of centrist positions, though, with us in our interview with him, and it was really interesting. Jerry Brown has been painted as this, moonbeam lefty by the Republicans. The fact is, he says he's more realistic, more pragmatic, and more conservative than he was when he was governor.
Right. I mean, we saw
30
him kind of
years ago.
hone those moderate credentials when he was mayor of Oakland, right? I mean, he's kind of a law and order, pro-development
yeah.
kind of guy. The
Right.
Governor Moonbeam was a long time ago. He's really moved much more towards the right, but he certainly isn't on the right.
Yeah,
in
no,
California.
absolutely. When you're talking about some of the positions, he said he's against sanctuary cities. He's against driver's license for undocumented immigrants. He doesn't want to touch Prop 13. He says, I'm not going to wade into that. Law and order, you're right. And I think this creates a challenge. There's no question about it for Meg Whitman, the former eBay CEO, and Steve Poizner, the other Republican, the state insurance commissioner. because Jerry Brown no longer has a challenger on the Democratic side after Gavin Newsom dropped out. So he can go to the middle already, and the other two are battling over who's the most conservative.
Interesting. Whitman's asserting he actually left the state in worse condition after he was there. And she points, of course, to unemployment rates. Is there any truth in that?
Well, no, he says he had a surplus, and of course he did. One of the reasons Prop 13 passed is because voters didn't like that surplus at the time. But then he embraced Prop 13, and he said he created 2 million jobs in his last term in office. You're going to be hearing a lot, with 40 years, the Whitman campaign already says they're going to have the biggest opposition research effort ever done in American politics, and she's got $39 million, so she can pay for it. So it'll be really interesting.
There's lots of excitement, though, in the Republican primaries, and just this week we had the first debate between the Republican candidates for the U.S. Senate position now held by Barbara Boxer.
That's right, and you've got Carly Fiorina, the former Hewlett-Packard CEO, against Tom Campbell, the very moderate former congressman from the South Bay. And then you've got Chuck DeVore, the assemblyman from Southern California, who's very conservative. And they really battled it out in a debate they had. And unusually, this debate was a lot over Israel and over who's the bigger supporter of Israel. Campbell has been surprisingly strong in this race. I mean, when he jumped from the governor's race to the Senate race, a lot of people thought, what is this all about? He's ahead in the polls. The polls show that he could best beat Barbara Boxer at this moment. Fiorina, who everybody thought would be the front runner running away with this because she's got more money, has made some stumbles with an ad that was a little crazy that showed Campbell as a demon sheep. I mean, it has been an interesting race already, and it's getting very, very nasty and contentious.
So how's Barbara Boxer reacting to the Republicans now? Does she just, because she's the incumbent, does she just kind of sit back and watch them battle it out? Or
I think
is she going
Boxer
strong
has
at this
got
point?
to be now nervous about what's going on. She had a press call with everyone today. They're saying they're going to go ahead, get these young Obama voters to come out for her. The fact is that what we heard today in the debate, all three of these Republican challengers are on top of the issues in California. All three are really good communicators. Boxer's going to have her work cut out for her.
We have to move along, but quickly, can you say why the issue was Israel?
Yeah, it all goes back to Tom Campbell, a donation he took from a Florida professor, Sami Al-Arian, who later pleaded guilty to conspiracy to aid a Palestinian group. Long story short, Campbell says he didn't know about those ties at the time. Campbell says he's always been a supporter of Israel, but the charges have come out from Fiorina that Campbell is not a supporter of Israel. In fact, they tried to suggest he's a supporter of terrorist groups. He really beat back at that today.
Well, lots of political action.
Yeah.
We'll turn to somebody else that has a lot of buzz going. But in this case, Rachel Gordon, Mayor Newsom made a threat to do something that he actually did today. Sent out notices to 15,000 people.
Yeah, a lot of times people don't like to come to work on Fridays, especially in this economy. But about half the city workers, a little more than that, got pink slips from City Hall. This is something that Mayor Newsom had threatened to do. He said he had to do it to try to save the city from fiscal financial ruin. What he said, though, you're going to get pink slips. You now work 40 hours a week. We're going to rehire you back, or most of you back, and that's what has people nervous. In a couple of weeks, they actually aren't going to lose their jobs. At a 37.5-hour week, 6.2% wage cut they'll get, that could save the city about $100 million. They're estimating over the year. San Francisco's looking at a $522 million deficit. Now that's kind of the opening salvo, really, Belva, for this, because the unions are going, you do this, we're going to sue you. Newsom's saying, come back with a better plan. I'm willing to listen to you. We've got to cut costs. This is my way to do it. If you have another way, let's do it. But what Newsom's whole thing is, you might be taking home less money, you might be working fewer hours, but you'll still have a job and there'll still be services kept largely intact.
Considering the legal issues that the governors had doing furloughs, that plan wasn't working. It looks like this is at least a way to keep these people on the job and on the payroll.
Right. I mean, that's what Newsom's saying. I mean, it really is kind of the beginning. The budget season is just starting. The mayor has until June 1st to present his budget proposal to the Board of Supervisors. And then really the big fights are going to happen. But Newsom's really been going after labor this time. Some of the big unions are kind of kept out of it at this point, the politically potent ones, the firefighters and the police officers who've got big raises over the last several years. Newsom saying, yeah, you've got big raises, but we're still going to come back to you and ask you to give up about 6%. Everyone's supposed to be doing that in the city.
So who is losing their jobs? Who does this affect?
Well, we don't really know at this point, but everyone got this, you know, from the street sweepers got the tickets, the healthcare workers, the clerks for the Board of Supervisors. A lot of them are working, walking around looking very angry and upset, really not knowing. I think a lot of people have been through this situation outside of City Hall for more than a year now with them coming. Just the whole uncertainty, and that has people on edge.
Well, so that's a big fight with those unions. But let's move to Muni, where there truly is a bigger fight.
Right. There's been a big fight, actually, with the Muni operators for a long time. The city's been trying to get concessions from them, labor concessions, about $15 million over 2 years' time. The drivers' union rejected this, and this is a union that is virtually guaranteed to be the second highest paid among transit operators in the nation. It's been enshrined in San Francisco City Charter, kind of the Bible of city government.
Said what are they getting an hour at Muni?
About $27 an hour for this. But as that's happening with not gaining labor concessions, we're also seeing very deep service cuts of about 10% are set to be enacted on May 1st. 330,000 or so service hours a week. That means you're going to be waiting longer for buses and streetcars and cable cars, and when they do come, they're going to be a lot more crowded.
So this is the dilemma we're seeing all over the state, but you're talking about some of these unions are really on the firing lines. When you're talking about the cuts, do they realize they're going to have to give a little something? Even Jerry Brown said that this week.
Well, they've so far, they're kind of playing this game of chicken in San Francisco. Now there's this other kind of the wild card that's coming out. One of the supervisors, Sean Ellsburn, is threatening to go to the ballot later this year to try to get it so there will not be one of the top paid systems in California and San Francisco here for the Muni drivers. He would like to see it subject to collective bargaining with all the other ones. The drivers are saying, you do that, it's going to be chaos on the streets, we're not going to take it. And Ellsburn's saying, look, I've got the people behind me on this.
But the cuts, like charging for transfers and senior passes, are those still on the table?
No, the transfers, there was, I think that lived for about 6 hours earlier that they wanted to start charging for transfers. They also took off raising the prices for discounted passes. But if for express routes and others, the prices are going up.
They'll start charging fees for Coit Tower, I understand, to visit, and the Botanical Gardens,
Right.
the suburban surcharge
Yeah,
for those of us out of town.
Right, they're really trying to go after out-of-towners now. The Recreation and Park Commission just this week said if you're coming from out of town, you want to go to the Arboretum and Golden Gate Park, lovely gardens there, you're going to have to start paying $7 to come in there.
However, you can come to San Jose for free.
Right, that can also be stopped, though, by the Board of Supervisors. So it's just the beginning of the budget battle in City Hall. It's going to be a big one.
The pain is spread all around, wherever we look, right? So thank you all very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Now, some other news from this week. Caltrans Highway Construction Division is inefficient and overstaffed. The state's Legislative Analyst's Office recommended in a new report that the agency cut 1,500 jobs. The reduction could save about $2 million of special state and federal funds, which could instead be used for construction. Well, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeal has barred attempts by Governor Schwarzenegger and the legislature to help reduce the state's deficit by cutting Medi-Cal payments to doctors and hospitals by 5% and in-home care workers by nearly 21%. The reductions would have totaled at least $175 million a year. The court said the state is required to provide equal access to health care for low-income residents and cannot make cuts solely to save money. San Francisco police officers will not be using tasers. The city's police commission voted 4-3 against tasers, even though a study found a third of officer-related shootings could have been avoided with the electronic devices. Chief George Gascon said he will no longer push for their use in the department. And now a conversation with Valerie Jarrett, White House senior advisor and assistant to President Obama for public engagement and intergovernmental affairs. Mrs. Jarrett is a longtime friend of the Obamas, and she joined the White House staff after playing a key role in the president's campaign. We talked to her earlier. Everybody wants to ask the president, all right, what will you do for me, or what can you do for me? With millions of Californians out of work, I'm asking for those millions of unemployed. What can the president do for Northern California?
Well, we've already done a great deal, and if we could take a moment just to go back and think about where we were 14 months ago, Bella, we were losing nationwide 700,000 jobs a month. And if you think about that in the context of today, where we really have a fraction of that, now the unemployment rate is still 9.7%. That's too high. And every morning President Obama gets up and he says, if there's a single American who wants a job who doesn't have one, I still have much work to do.
California's unemployment rate is way above that of the national average. Many of these people have been chronically unemployed. What can the president do to put more fire under this?
We know that there's only so much that government can do. The long-term sustainable health of our economy rests with the private sector. So steps that we can take to get people who have been unemployed into job training programs that are tailored for the jobs that are going to be available, not the jobs that are never coming back, but the jobs of tomorrow. And so green jobs are called, for example.
I think that's one of the problems. The Bay Area expected to be one of the centers of green growth with the technology down the peninsula and so forth, but we don't seem to be reaping the benefits that Californians have envisioned for themselves.
Well, you know what? It's coming, and it is not as fast as it should be. We're doing everything we can to create this sense of urgency. But California, you're right, in Silicon Valley, you have today new innovation, new ideas that are just bursting at the seams. But let's face it, as a result of what happened in the financial markets a year ago, the stress that was put on the financial institutions where they came near collapse, and there were some very tough and I would say unpopular measures that had to be taken to use taxpayer dollars, precious taxpayer dollars, to go and to help infuse capital into the banks to stabilize them. Well, you know what? They're stable now.
We've been discussing on this program the impending closure of the NUMMI auto plant here in Fremont, in California. 4,700 jobs, almost 5,000, thousands more when you talk about all the people that service those industries.
The suppliers, yes.
Now, this plant was owned by General Motors, which is now practically owned by the U.S. taxpayer. Is it wrong for the unions to expect the president to put a little pressure on the company that inherited General Motors' problems to also help them?
The president has said, look, I have a country to run. I'm not going to be the CEO for the auto industry. But you're right, we do have an investment there. And so, of course, we've encouraged both the management and the unions to work together to see what they can do and to make sure that we look for new opportunities for the people who are sadly going to be laid off, and to try to find new avenues for them. And if there are training dollars that are necessary, and city colleges are going to be completely revamped under President Obama to make sure that we're actually training people for jobs that are going to exist.
So with cuts in education, how is the president going to put the pieces of the puzzle together?
Well, I'm glad you brought up education, because that's really the future. And we put a great deal of money into public education in the stimulus package that was passed a year ago, and in the president's budget for this year. There are additional resources. And what we're really trying to do is to create competition so that the best programs are rewarded with financial resources. And we can't have kind of the status quo anymore in education.
Let's turn to the other topic that's taken up the whole year or so that you all have been in the White House practically, and that is trying to fashion some reforms for health within the healthcare field.
The public is so frustrated because what they see are families who are being discriminated against because a member has a pre-existing condition. People are watching here in California a 39% increase in insurance rates. How can people plan accordingly? How can people who are already struggling deal with that? The president said, look, it's been an inclusive process. We've heard from everyone. He's included Republican ideas, good ideas that came out of the process, into the bill. And now he's saying, look, let's have a simple majority, up, down, vote, and then let's move forward.
And I mean, he has trouble within his own party in embracing these bold ideas of his. So
change is never easy. You know, we always talked about change in the campaign, and the president, everywhere he went, he said, and it's going to be really hard. Well, you know what? It's really hard. There is an entrenched status quo bureaucracy in Washington with a stranglehold. There are literally, you know, millions of dollars that are spent on lobbyists. The insurance industry is fighting hard against change because they know that they're going to have to change their practices, and they don't want to. But the president is just determined, and he is as committed to this as he was when he first began to run for president, that this is what the American people deserve. They shouldn't have to worry about health insurance. They really shouldn't.
In California, where the president has always enjoyed great popularity, what can the president say to his liberal base, and particularly to African Americans who don't feel that they are faring well at all overall in this administration?
Well, first of all, I'll take your last comment first. The African American community, you're absolutely right, is disproportionately affected by unemployment being higher in the community than it is in the general population. Health disparities are greater in the African American community than in the general population. Public education is more of a challenge. Teenage dropout rate is more of a challenge in the African American community. And so if you look at the president's domestic agenda that we've been talking about for the last few minutes, each one of those will disproportionately benefit the African American community as well. And so I guess what I would say is the president shares the frustration going around the country, the anger around the country, and why is it that the government isn't working for the people? And we have to encourage people to participate in the process as well. Speak out and make your voices heard, and together we're going to make this country better.
Well, that's something Californians are used to doing. So.
They're not shy, that's true.
Thank you very much, Valerie,
you're welcome.
Jarrett, for
It's my
joining us.
pleasure.
Okay.
It's an honor to meet you.
Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have tonight. We hope that you'll visit our website at kqed.org/thisweek. That's where you can watch complete episodes or segments and subscribe to our newsletter and our podcasts. And on this first week of Women's History Month, we invite you to share your thoughts about our program and our stories. I'm Belva Davis. Good night.